have under a 2% recidivism rate. The master's program is at 0% over the last 5 years. Other programs, one other program, Hustling for Higher Education, a good friend of mine is executive director. They have a documentary out, 0%. 0% of the people returned that graduated from this program. When Governor Cuomo came out in support of it, of helping to fund it, it costs $5,000 a year to educate someone. It costs $60,000 to incarcerate. People argued and said that we shouldn't pay for that type of programming. So the programming now in the state prisons are, number one, they're outdated. The computer program I was using in 2010 was Windows 1997, and only a few people had access to them. Also, for those that have to go through where I learned masonry, vocational programs. I did 6 months, but they can't use it. They're not going to have people inside of prison building the walls of the prison. It was outdated. At least all the vocational programs were at least outdated by 25 years. At least by 25 years. So then a person gets out, and 30% of the people in prison are, at least in New York, are recidivists. At the time I was there, that's roughly around 21,000 people times $60,000 a year. Do the math. We're talking in the hundreds of millions. I think Connecticut's correctional budget is roughly around $1 billion. So if you return to prison, you take the same programs that failed, you come back a third time, you take the same programs that failed, you come back a fourth time, you take the same programs that failed. And then when people start talking about prison reform like we did, they say, well, we don't have money in the budget. But you have money to spend $60,000 a year when a person comes back. You can't spend $5,000 a year, maybe reduce sentences and save the money, both on the front end and on the back end, in order to ensure that people have programs that actually work. So there needs to be a radical shift in how we think about programs inside of prison, a radical shift in looking at creating, we want to create a committee that would actually look at what's working and what's not working, and then allocate resources based upon that to continue to fuel a system that's failing 79% of the time. What other state program, what for-profit agency would continue to function and spending that amount of money with a failure rate of 79%? And you have to say it's not an individual responsibility issue, it's a systemic issue. And I think that, well,
yeah, we feel your frustration. Who else has a question?
First, a brief comment and then a question. The public health people tell us that the use of drugs, heroin overdosage, is spreading to parts of the country which that were not present before. And it has raised some eyebrows and some interest among parts of the country that previously were really not interested because it didn't impact them. I just want to point out, as a practicing physician in a neighboring community not far from here, in the 70s, the community was a blue-collar community, relatively low, non-white population. There was an outbreak of drug overdose, and I was involved in managing people who had overdosed to the point that they had to be brought into the emergency room and resuscitated. Many of them developed, complications related to drug use. Nothing was ever done about it. It just hardly made the press. I just want to point it out that there was a problem that existed now. We're more enlightened now. We've seen around us that, nearby communities have had issues among college students in the well-to-do university that got into trouble. That's a comment. The question is probably quite controversial, and I don't have any strong feelings on this myself. what I'm hearing, for the last hour or two is, interesting stories of how the drug culture has impacted on our society, had bankrupted us in terms of, the number of people who are incarcerated. In addition to being a social problem, it's a major economic problem. And maybe those funds that we are, putting aside to, institutionalize these people could be better used. The thing that I bring up is, what is the current consensus on legalizing drug use, okay? This was kind of a conversation a while ago, but I don't hear it anymore. Everything points to the fact that we're really not doing very well. I spent some time at UConn, okay, sitting in with the residents. They have they supply medical care for hospital care for the state prison system, okay? It's just sad to see these people coming back over and over again. So I just would like your thoughts on
That
that.
drug legalization. I have a feeling David. Let's go first.
You may or may not know that legalization of marijuana is expected to be on the Massachusetts ballot in 2016. And I think that will be an influence on the state of Connecticut either way. There's some consensus at the legislature that this is an issue that should be taken up. I've heard it in many legislative meetings I've had. People see the potential impact and financial windfall from taxing and legalizing marijuana. Whether that will ultimately, and I think that will pass in the next 3 or 4 years. I think that will happen. And we'll do it legislatively in Connecticut. And no state has done it legislatively yet. It's always been a ballot initiative. Whether that ultimately leads to legalization of more hard drugs is hard to tell. But as more states have it, I think you're going to see more embracing of it and understanding that it lessens the impact and cost of our criminal justice system while generating revenue. So I think there's going to be a big push there.
And that all makes perfect sense, but morally I'm opposed to it just because I'm coming from a place where I've seen so much misery associated with drugs. I understand that, again, the financial windfall for the state. I understand that there's the perception that it's a harmless drug. But again, I just say, for me personally, morally, I would be opposed to it. I don't support it. I've had conversations with people and they liken it to the prohibition of alcohol, but then I look at all of the social ills associated with alcohol. So I understand where we're going, and ultimately it's something that will probably happen here in Connecticut, but me personally, I'm just opposed.
Similarly, from a moral standpoint, only because of my own experience and from how I saw it devastate many communities, from Albany to living in the South Bronx in the height of the crack era, it just devastated many communities. However, I also have friends that live in Europe, and many of these countries that have legalized, at least at some level, don't have the same level of problems that we have inside of our society. So we're kind of in a darned if you do, darned if you don't. I think we're at the point where it's the lesser of two evils. And if sometimes what we do inside of our cultures is we legalize what we can't eradicate, to the extent to where we can hopefully control it in a sense, as with prohibition and others. However, doing that creates another set of problems. I think the real question is going to arise, what set of problems are we willing to live with? And I think we're going to move towards legalization. If it leads to people to access to better health care, if it leads to using those funds to work with people who are addicted, as in other countries, then that's a positive. However, from a moral standpoint, it's hard for me to put my stamp of approval on it. And as a pastor, I'm going to have a really hard time dealing with that issue when it gets to New York, which I'm sure it will.
All right. I think I'd like to move towards closing this time. But I have two things that haven't been mentioned yet that I'd like to just give folks a chance up here to respond to. One other issue that I know is happening, I guess the governor is proposing, is extending juvenile proceedings currently only for those under age 18 to those 18 to 20, and possibly even 21 to 24-year-olds. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and sort of the question of what point do we say that people are or can be held liable for crimes as an adult? What impact does that have? Yeah.
My officers are currently going through a lot of training, retraining on how we view young people, and the perception that kids don't see things and process things like adults or teenagers don't. We have been working, we have youthful offenders, and that age, we've extended that age, and now it seems that they're looking to move that even further. But it's a very challenging population to work with. And when we say they don't process things like we do, we really, that goes without saying. Some of the conversations we have with young people as to why they did what they did, it's just mind-boggling. But there is clearly a history in our state of treating and punishing children like adults. And that's problematic because there isn't that same understanding of the crime. So I'm happy to see that we're evolving to a place where we're treating children like children and not punishing them like adults. We still have, for serious crimes, if a young person commits a serious crime, they are referred to the adult court system. But the problem we face when we're dealing with that is all of our programs are for adults. And sometimes we'll find children in adult programming because they're not in the juvenile system. We can't refer to a program that he's not coming from. So it leaves, when we put them in places where they shouldn't be, the resources don't fit, they don't work. And so you're stuck with a child or a young person and nowhere to refer. So, again, I think that, and we live in a culture where we've kind of extended this childhood age or range. And I can say I have a 24-year-old and I still call her my baby. She's still a young person and thinks very differently than adults. So I understand that and I see the benefit of it. It's just troubling for me to see young people in an adult system that is not prepared to deal with that.
And it's pretty remarkable that Governor Malloy started that conversation. Again, there's been no legislation put together yet. There's not language to look at, but he's tasked the Sentencing Commission, which is a nonpartisan commission with a lot of diverse stakeholders, with coming up with some ideas of how to move forward on this. No governor in the United States has even brought this up. That's how forward-thinking it is. And treating 18, 19, and 20-year-olds like juveniles, as juveniles, does make some sense. There's very clear neuroscience that shows that males don't finish developing until 25, their brains, that is. Our U.S. Supreme Court has recognized that in recent rulings. So I think you're going to see some legislation grappling with that issue. But to Tammy's point about the programming, the Commissioner of Correction is a very, very progressive and enlightened person, and he is committed to creating an area in a prison where the 18 to 21-year-old offenders, or even up to 25, would be housed, so that they're not being housed with a 50-year-old career criminal, that they have programming that matches their development and greater opportunity for rehabilitation. It's pretty clear that young people are more likely to turn it around. I mean, we have an amazing example of that on the panel today, but there is a lot of opportunity for young people, so something that's going to be interesting to see.
I see some questions. I'll take them if they're on this point. Okay, after George speaks. Sure.
Yeah, just prison is such a dehumanizing space that for someone 14, in New York at 14 years old, you can receive a 9 to life sentence. And I watched many young boys grow up in the prison system and at age 16 enter a maximum security facility with all that comes with it. And the system people can be very predatory, and it's very easy to take advantage of a 16 and 17 and 18-year-old. And since we've moved from a penitentiary system to a correctional system, are adult prisons really best suited in a correctional model for a 16-year-old boy or girl? And I would have to say no. But then again, to that point is we don't have the programs, especially even if you put them in an adult system, to address children the same way that you would someone who's older, who's an adult. And just as these children are growing and maturing in a maximum security prison or an adult prison, the maladjustment that takes place upon their release for them to go back into society is very difficult, to say the least.
Thank you.
From what I've read and spoken to people about, it's my understanding that Governor Malloy and his staff intend for their new proposals to be helpful to juveniles. But no legislation has yet been drafted, and I believe there's room for discussion, negotiation, and fine-tuning. In particular, what sounds like a very nice proposal by the governor that hearings for youngsters, however they're defined, whether it's at 21 or 24, be, quote, confidential, means that courtrooms will be locked, means that the press will not have its right to hear what goes on. That's serious First Amendment consideration. It means that the defendant's Sixth Amendment right to a public trial will apparently be just done away with. It means, I believe, if carried out in, quote, confidentiality, who knows who will be able to hear that what goes on in the courtroom. Probably a youngster's parents would be allowed in. But if they are friends or neighbors or simply people who are interested in seeing how the juvenile court system is working, they're, to me, very serious considerations that I think yet need to be taken into consideration.
Did you have a comment?
I did. It wasn't specifically on the specific question.
Okay. I want to try and just make this our last topic of conversation, so I apologize. Elliot, you had your hand up. Is this on this point? On this point?
No.
Okay. So we're sorry.
If I could just
Yeah.
add, I believe that the juvenile court should not be closed. I worked with a young family. It was a Haitian family. The grandmother did not speak English. The mother and daughter were really, there was a miscarriage of justice with this case. It involved the Department of Children and Families. They wouldn't let me in to advocate for the family. They wouldn't provide an interpreter. And I felt all of the malfeasance that went on by DCF was actually covered up. So, and even juvenile families who use the juvenile courts are troubled by the cloaking all of this activity under the term of confidentiality. I think the public would be receptive to opening some of these discussions up. And I understand the privacy issues, but I'm just troubled about the confidentiality that goes on in the juvenile courts. And I believe oftentimes it's a cover-up for a failed system.
So I want to end with a chance not to put you on the spot, George, but just for some more words from our faith traditions, and if there's anything you want to reference in terms of the Christian tradition and what it has to say about these issues, or a prayer you'd like to offer us, it would be really lovely. Then I'll close with a Jewish prayer. Okay.
I think I'll talk on a personal level and then on the grand scale in terms of the Christian tradition. I believe it's in Luke where Jesus is quoted saying, to whom much is given, much is required, and the one who is forgiven much loves much. And I know in my own life, in many of my brothers that have returned from prison, those verses have weighed on our heart, and we've used them as motivating factors to really make a difference, all the way from being the President's Guest of Honor 2005 State of the Union address, to running programs, to just being good husbands, sons, and members of society. On a grand scale, there is a tradition where Jesus states that he separates people who are on their way to heaven and hell, or judgment takes place based upon how they treated the least of these, how they treated the least in society. And one of the judgment points is, how did you treat the prisoner? How did you treat the prisoner? This theme is taken up by Paul and others. I preached recently on this issue from A Justice for All, talking about how Lady Justice is not blind at all, but she has a see-through scarf on, and she's not colorblind either. And my text was actually from, I believe it was Leviticus, the Holiness Code, that talked about that. The English Standard Version talks about, translates it, you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not show deference for the poor or show favor to the rich. But in justice, you should do righteous judgment. And that for me speaks on a grand scale about why, as a Christian, I believe I'm mandated to stand for justice, to see justice served for the least of those in societies. That's why we call ourselves Forgotten Voices, because we wanted we wanted to give voice to the voiceless. And never underestimate the power of working inside of a prison. I think this was said earlier. Some of the things that really helped us make it through our prison sentence and want to do better, to be better, was the love of people that came in from the outside and volunteered, and allowed us to feel a sense of humanity, where we had our humanity validated. And that is the thing I think that binds our traditions together, the fact that the image of God is on everyone, and that with that image comes value, comes inherent dignity, and because of that, anything that tarnishes or that separates or that divides, I believe is outside of God's will, that God's heart breaks over that, and that we are called to seek for justice for all. And lastly, let us not forget that mass incarceration and criminal justice issues are part of a larger systemic issue that's tied to economic justice, that's tied to other forms of justice. And I think it's until we address some of the root causes that allow some communities to be impoverished while others to flourish, I think we're going to see similar results.
Amen. Amen. I want to point out that Mark Kosnoff here, the director of United Action in Connecticut, and many members of that organization are here today. So it's really, it's wonderful to feel the sense of community and connection across faith and cities and across our state this afternoon. And I know that here at Congregation Beth Shalom, we're going to, stay on top of what's going on legislatively, and are happy to make phone calls and send emails and all those kinds of things if our hearts so move us in that direction.